celebrating 48 years on the air. Award-winning Farmweek is a production of Mississippi State University Extension.
Today on Farm Week, we continue with On the Farm, the Pentecost brothers making a tough living in catfish farming. Plus, speaking of a tough living, a preview of next week's story on veterinarian Kim Klunk. In Southern Gardening, echinacea is not just an herbal remedy. And concluding this week's feature, the Pentecost brothers making more money but spending more of it to stay afloat. Farm Week starts right now.
Hello everyone, I'm Zach Ashmore. Welcome to the second show of our 48th year on the air.
And I'm Mike Russell. As always, great to have you with us again here on Farm Week, which is brought to you by Mississippi State University Extension. This week we continue Season 2 of On the Farm, our Emmy-winning series on stress in agriculture. That stress is certainly a part of daily life of the two brothers you are about to meet. Ed and Ben Pentecost run a catfish farm in the Mississippi Delta. They carefully go to work knowing they could lose hundreds of thousands of dollars on any given day.
I'm Ed Pentecost from Dodgeville, Mississippi, and I'm a partner in Pentecost Brothers, a catfish farm. We raise farm-raised catfish on 585 acres of water in Sunflower County.
We grew up on a row crop farm. Our dad raised rice and soybeans, so he retired in 1985, and Ed and I took over the farm, and we were raising rice, soybeans, and catfish.
Catfish was really taking off at the time, back in the early 80s. It was expanding very rapidly. We actually built 4 ponds that year. The next year we built 4 more. Then we waited a couple of years, built 4 more. It just expanded over time until we were eventually spending a lot more of our time and energy on the catfish than we were on the row crop.
But at that time, 95% of our income was coming from fish and about 5% from farm. And our time wasn't divided that way. Our time was more 50-50. So we went total fish starting in 1993. We only need enough for 1 truck. So we only need enough for 1 truck. There are times where I've wondered whether it was a worthwhile life choice to choose the catfish business, because it's so demanding day in and day out.
Catfish farming is really tough, both physically as well as mentally and financially. In the United States, aquaculture is not a labor-heavy industry, it's more capital-oriented. So there is less number of people managing huge amounts of fish, so that makes it much more rigorous in their management aspects. So the owner or the manager has a lot more duties that is atypical in other aquaculture sectors.
Every day of the week, we start out by checking oxygen levels and cutting off the aerators that have been cut on during the night as the oxygen dropped.
Fish have to have oxygen just as people do. They get theirs out of the water like we get ours out of the air. The aerators float out in the pond, and they have a 10-horse motor, and they churn the water to put oxygen in the water. The finer the particles you can break the water, the more oxygen it can absorb. We try to keep the fish in real good shape overnight because we don't get paid for any that arrive at the plant in bad condition. You know, they'll if they're dead or too weak. Sometimes weakness will cause red spots in the fish. When the truck gets here, we'll get out there with a boat and gather them up and tighten them up where we can dip them with our loader. We load anywhere from 500 to 1,500 pounds in the dip. On a bob truck, we usually load around 15,000 pounds. On a trailer, 25,000 pounds. It's something, like I said, we do at least twice a week, year round.
Market prices can be a challenge too. Right now we're experiencing the highest prices that we ever have. But even though the price of fish is higher than it's ever been, we're also paying more for feed than we ever have. It's highest prices ever. Where the cheapest formulas are well over $500 a ton. So that adds up quickly when you feed daily.
Feed is the biggest of all the financial input that you require. So feed appropriates close to about 45 to 50% of the total cost of the farming. A typical catfish farm may range from $4,500 to $10,000, $12,000 per acre. So that's the amount of money that you need to incur in a year per acre. So you can just imagine the amount of money that is required to run a business in its entirety.
We had one year that the price of feed went up at the same time we had an oversupply of fish, and the price of fish went down, where it cost us 25 cents a pound more to grow fish than we were receiving. At that time, fish were 85 cents a pound. So, you know, it's tough to come to work every day when you know you're losing 25 cents on every pound.
You cannot sacrifice or cull those fish just because the prices are low, right? You still have to sell them to recover that money that you've already put in, even though you're not making profit. And that's a very common thing. Cash flow problems can come in this kind of situation, you know. When you really need cash and you don't have it, you can't feed it. When you can't feed it, your fish won't grow. So your profit that was actually going to come in October or December time may not be fruitful. 2 to 3 years, you can go down from a very profitable operation to bankruptcy.
So basic market factors became a formidable risk for Ed and Bed Pentecost, but that's just the beginning of the story. We'll have the conclusion of part 1 coming up a little later in the show. Next, a preview of On the Farm Part 3. Next week, we meet Kim Klunk, a young large animal veterinarian who graduated from the MSU Vet School with farm experience and big dreams. New to the field, Kim expected a certain amount of stress, but MSU staff psychologist Dr. Pauline Prince suggests viewers watch next week's segment for the rest of the story.
I would have folks watch it so that they can develop an understanding, and from that understanding, a little more compassion. You know, sometimes it's real easy to, when it's my Fluffy that I just walked in the door with, and my Fluffy that is struggling, that I have difficult choices to make, that veterinarian has helped several people through difficult choices all day. And if for one reason or another something didn't go as planned, that as a community, if we could have a little more compassion for the veterinarian as well, that, they're doing the best they can for all of the little fluffies that walk through the door that day. And in Dr. Klunk's circumstances, for all of the cattle and the farm animals and the large animals that she took care of that day, she's doing the very best she can for her clients, for her neighbors, for her friends, for the community that she cares for and their animals. She works a very long day. So the more that they learn about her day, the more that we can develop a sense of understanding. And from that understanding, I hope a little compassion.
That's Season 2, Part 3 of On the Farm with large animal veterinarian Kim Klunk. Her story coming up on next week's show.
On the lighter side, you may have thought of echinacea as an herbal remedy, but also known as the coneflower. It can be a great aesthetic remedy for your home's landscape. Here's Eddie with examples like adobe, sombrero, and powwow.
Southern Gardening is in Long Beach, Mississippi at the home of Ginger and Dave, admiring some beautiful varieties of coneflowers growing in their landscape. Let's take a closer look at some of these plants. Echinacea adobe orange from the Sombrero series is valued for its super bloom power and well-branched, compact habit. It has 2.5 to 3 inch intense orange flowers with a matching orange cone that really makes the color pop. Echinacea Sombrero Yellow Improved is a vibrant perennial boasting a profusion of rich golden yellow flowers adorned with a skirt of wide, overlapping, drooping petals surrounding a copper central cone. Well branched, its numerous flowering stems are sturdy and held upright. This coneflower has a compact habit and provides a vibrant floral display in the landscape from early to late summer. Echinacea powwow wildberry coneflower is a dazzling addition to any landscape, flaunting vivid magenta pink petals that radiate from a bold orange central cone. Standing at a manageable height of 18 to 24 inches, this robust perennial forms a compact, bushy clump that adds a splash of vibrant color from early summer well into the fall. Its dark green, lance-shaped foliage provides a lush backdrop, making the radiant blooms pop even more. Beyond their aesthetic appeal, coneflowers are a magnet for butterflies and bees, supporting local pollinators and adding dynamic life to the landscape. As you can see, coneflowers can add visual interest and appeal to any landscape. I'm Eddie Smith, and I will see you next time on Southern Gardening.
We'll take a short break, but stick around. Coming up, we conclude Part 2 of this week's episode of On the Farm. We head back to Doddsville, Mississippi. Ed and Ben Pentecost, two hardworking brothers, have farmed catfish for 40 years, but now it's harder to keep up with the high cost of running their fish farm. And there's another frightening risk that comes with every sunset. Can they cope with the stress, or should they close down altogether? The conclusion coming up on Farm Week.
Here's this week's Farm Week calendar. Just one item this week, the EPA has mandated new training requirements for private pesticide applicators. The requirements, for those who handle restricted use pesticides on farmland and need to renew or obtain certification, began July 1st. The training is on video, covering many new procedures. At the end, there's a 55-question exam, and you must score at least 70%. Cost of the training is $60 per person, with 2 ways to take the test: online or in person at a local extension office. For computer questions about the training and exam, call the Center for Technology Outreach at 662-325-3226. Or for questions more related to who's qualified, who needs to take the training, call 662-325-5829. Remember, the new private pesticide applicator training requirements began July 1st. And that's this week's Farm Week calendar.
I believe in people and their hopes, their aspirations and their faith. I believe in my own work and in the opportunity I have to make my life useful to humanity. I believe that education is a lifelong process, and the greatest university is the home. That my success as a teacher is proportional to those qualities of mind and spirit that give me welcome entrance to the homes of the families that I serve. Because I believe these things, I am an extension professional.
Time for the market report. Looks like numbers going up.
That's right, Mike. Numbers are trending in that direction, and we'll get into it. But first, the numbers. What were last week's biggest gains and losses? And then we speak with MSU livestock economist Josh Maples on Mississippi's largest ag export, poultry. What do those markets look like right now? So, markets closed last Friday trending up, row crops getting the best and worst of it, while livestock a mixed bag. Let's take a look. Last week's biggest gain, soybean oil up nearly 5 cents, a whopping over 11% increase from the previous week. Last week's biggest loss, cotton, down nearly 1 3/4 cents, and over 2 1/4% decrease from the previous week. Poultry, the largest ag export of Mississippi, broilers to be exact, and keeping up with production trends this year is MSU Extension livestock economist Josh Maples, who characterizes them as surprising. So Josh, what are the trends in chicken production so far in 2024?
So it's been interesting, Zach. The chicken production, broiler production has actually been down a little bit, about 1%, which is a bit surprising given what's going on with the feed cost side of the equation. You know, feed is the primary input into broiler production, into the chicken that we ultimately eat. Prices have been down. Corn prices down quite a bit. Soybean meal prices are down quite a bit from where they were a year ago. So if you look at that piece, you might expect broiler production to be up a little bit so far in the first half of the year, but it hasn't been the case. Now, I will say if we look at the annual expectations, so USDA's projections is for broiler production to be up a little bit by the end of the year. So maybe some stronger production in the second half of the year than we saw in 2023, but so far running a little bit below 2023 levels.
So are there differences in production based on bird size?
There are, and that's really been one of the kind of interesting parts to dig into. So if you look at the birds, call them smaller birds, they're about 4 1/4 pounds or less. Production of those birds has been higher than a year ago, about 6% I think is the number. And it's because we've seen some stronger consumer demand for those kind of whole birds, so think rotisserie chickens. We've seen some stronger demand there, so it's led to some higher production at that level. If you look at the birds kind of in the middle, so that 4 to 6 and then 6 to 7-ish pound range, that's where production has been a little bit lower than a year ago. And then if you look at the heavy birds, so over 7 pounds, we've seen production, the share of total broiler production, there's been more of them in that kind of that heavier bird range than we saw a year ago. So that tells us a couple of different things. You know, one, consumer demand drives what goes on in poultry production. That's not surprising, obviously, but I do think we're seeing, given the relatively cheaper feed prices than we've had, we're seeing some of the birds get pushed a little bit heavier. And so that's probably why we're seeing a little bit less in that kind of mid-range or that mid-weight range. And we're seeing kind of some growth on the lighter side, but also the heavier side because it's a little bit cheaper to feed them than it has been.
And that's it for a deeper look into the markets. Seems like row crops facing a slight turnaround, save for cotton, still falling. Poultry too, moving upwards. For now. Mike?
Thanks, Zach. Now the conclusion of this week's On the Farm extended feature. Ed and Ben Pentecost understand the day-to-day market risks of farming catfish. Those risks are significant, but they're only part of the picture. We pick up with another kind of risk that comes up when the sun goes down.
And once you're in, and it's you have to keep going. You can't hold back. You have to grow fish and sell them. They're not like soybeans that you can put in a bin and store. You have to keep them alive and keep them fed, so the expense never stops. I guess our biggest stress was probably worrying about our fish living through the night every night. We have good help that are out here watching the fish, but there's always things that can go wrong. The biggest risk that we have is a power outage, because we don't have enough backup equipment to cover all of our ponds if we have a total power outage. In 2015, we experienced our worst night ever. Someone hit a power pole that took the town north and south of us out, and all of our power totally.
I was here by myself and with my night man. He called me about 8:30 at night, had an electrical outage. So I called the electric company. They tell me it'll be 3 hours.
And we already had every piece of equipment running. It was the kind of night that everything was already running before the power went out. We were all out here playing musical chairs with our tractor aerators, trying to keep fish alive. They pop up in one pond, we put an aerator in, get them back down, and then they'd pop up in the pond we pulled that aerator from. And we just moved around waiting on a repair that never came. We estimated that we lost over 300,000 pounds of fish that night. That's a level of stress that most people don't even have to face, but we've had things like that happen so many times that we keep, get over it and keep going.
I don't know what the end game will be, how we'll ever decide to get out of this business, or whether we'll sell the ponds or rent them out or convert them to row crop or whatever. I don't know what the best alternative is there, but at some point we'll probably have to consider that, and we hadn't got a game plan yet.
Do you ever feel kind of trapped?
Yeah. If we decided today that we're stopping, we're getting out, we'd be faced with how do we sell what inventory of fish we have. It usually takes a year to sell the amount of fish that we have in inventory now, and they may not all be big enough right now, so some will require some more feed. Well, if you keep feeding them, you keep checking oxygen, you keep all the same labor. You have to have the insurance, you have to have the financing, and everything to keep going till every fish can be sold. Then you have the ponds, and have to decide, what to do with those ponds. Are they going to be farmed, or are they going to, be rented to someone or sold to someone who's going to grow fish? Right now, it's easier just to keep going.
Ed and Ben keep their chins held high, but the stress is intense. Very important. If you or someone you know is in emotional crisis, call or text 988 anytime for confidential free crisis support. Well, next week we continue our Ag Stress series on the farm with the story of a large animal vet, Kim Klunk.
She expected a certain amount of stress when she started practicing a couple of years ago. But long hours, deadlines, and money pressure take a big toll on your mental health. How do you cope, especially when rural areas don't have enough mental health resources?
And that's just the tip of the iceberg. On the Farm continues next time on Farm Week.
Remember, if you missed a story, look for past episodes of Farm Week on our website at farmweek.tv.
And don't forget to follow us on Facebook and YouTube. See you next week. Thanks for watching.